Hey, good morning, everybody. It's Patrick Global Truth Bomb riffing on Tuesday, August 22nd, 2023 at approximately 9:45 a.m. And wow, yesterday for me was really an extraordinary day, but it's kind of shoehorned into pretty much everything that we all fit into our heads on a daily basis between what we're kind of bombarded with in mainstream media, whatever we're tracking on, and of course our personal lives and everything we have to do to survive and thrive, hopefully, if you're in that category. But for those of you who aren't, there's a lot of things in this world that many of you obviously aren't aware of. And, I found myself yesterday in this interview that I was able to produce with two of, I think, the two most important minds on the planet that I've come across. One is a gentleman by the name of Yanis Varoufakis, who was the former Greek Minister of Finance and is a well known personality in certain circles in the United States. And really, quite frankly, around the world. The guy's a professor, he's an author, he's also involved with being the leader of probably the inspirational leader. I'm not sure if they actually quantify him as a leader of DM25, which is a kind of a progressive political paradigm in Europe that he started. And I was able to create a conversation, and I've been envisioning this for a very, very long time with Bill Black, William K. Black, who is my mentor and a man who I think is the one voice that, in this incredibly insane, it feels like a volcano of noise all the time, that um, we have a bunch of different vectors that people pay attention to for one reason or another that are just fighting for control of the bandwidth and your sort of awareness. And in many cases in media writ large, there's personalities involved, and they attract audiences for one reason or another. And what I said at the outset of this interview that I had done yesterday, that I'm not Russell Brand or Jimmy Dore or, of course, Joe Rogan or Rachel Maddow or Tucker Carlson or Anderson Cooper or, Sean Hannity and that sort of thing. And I said, and thank God, there's a reason for that, because if you take the sum total of all of them, and I'll even throw in all of the major media from the New York Times to just the lump sum of CNN and MSNBC, pretty much all media in the United States, they lied to us. They are a canard. They are a joke. They are fake media. They are, unfortunately, and it always makes me laugh when I think about this sort of prism. They are the they are the you know they are exactly what Donald Trump says they are, fake media. And of course, he's been playing that game for a long time, and he's a Mr. Chameleon Joker guy, and we are overwhelmed with all things Donald Trump and the indictments of Donald Trump and the ongoing convictions. And that's pretty much the news of the world. Minus other kind of headliners with the Russian-Ukrainian war and maybe China and some powerful things that are out there. And meanwhile, the economy is what the economy does, and Wall Street does what Wall Street does. And here I was yesterday talking to Giannis and Bill about the reality of the last 13 years. And I remember yesterday, right before we hit record, I had mentioned to Giannis, I said, I feel like it's Groundhog Day. And he was like, yeah, it's not even interesting anymore. It's gotten to the point, and I've kind of sensed this from watching what Giannis has been in the midst of. And for those of you who know who Giannis is, I think about, and I've been pursuing Giannis to actually do this interview with him, with Bill Black, because I know that the intersection between the two of them are the revelations that the entire world needs to put their head around. And I'm hopeful that because Giannis is the guy who he is, and he has reached to certain people, that if they pay attention and they listen to the information that we revealed yesterday, we could immediately reach millions of people, which is what I'm hoping for. But when I've noticed, so for example, with this the elections in Greece, the elections in Turkey, the elections in, I believe, Italy, possibly Germany. But anyway, DM25 was in the midst of all of this stuff. And at one point, and Giannis, I'm a little bit cloudy on whether or not I don't think Giannis was running for office. I think he's more of kind of like sort of centerpiece, the sort of go-to guy in terms of verbalizing exactly what the whole of the effort is in context of the stuff that I'm, you know, mesh with him, which is the revelations of who controls the world and why, and what it means in context to our systems and what they're supposed to be, and what Bill and I, or Bill has devised that I've, you know, obviously put cameras on and revealed, which reveals the largest criminal conspiracy and cover up in history that's global, that has complete control of everything, and why. And we revealed that. But um, Giannis and I had, you know, I guess thought that Giannis was frustrated and he had to take a vacation, as it turns out. And that's why it took so long for me to get this podcast done, because after the elections, he took about a month vacation and then he finally came up for air and he reached out to me and I was like, oh, yeah, finally we can make this happen. But right before the elections, he got jumped by a bunch of fascist thugs. And so what I've been saying, for those of you who follow my truth bombs, and I hope that if you will, please like and subscribe and share, because of course the information I have is the most important information that the world needs to come to understand, because it's the story that nobody understands. And I always say corruption births and fuels fascism. And in the case of Giannis, he was a living embodiment of that. He was in a cafe in Greece, you know, meeting with a bunch of his colleagues, and then suddenly he got jumped in a very public way by a bunch of fascist thugs. And they did that to send a message. And that's what fascists do. Um, they're programmed to, you know, come after you, intimidate through violence, and make your life miserable. I think of them as kind of like these, you know, the heavy hands of the union busters sort of thing back in the day. And, you know, they did that. And so Giannis, after this incredible, really 13-year odyssey, he's been on a very similar trajectory as I have. So what happened with Giannis is in 2015, he was elected to the Greek parliament, and then he wound up in, just apparently by happenstance, he was assigned to become the Greek finance minister. And there he was in the position to deal with the fallout of the Greek debt crisis, which was an extension of everything I've been laying on you as a result of the 2008 great financial crisis, where one firm in particular, ironically, Goldman Sachs, had laid a bunch of toxic debt on Greece, blew it up, and then ultimately the EU, the central bank of the EU, was positioned to create all sorts of incredibly, you know, paradoxical, you know, smoke and mirrors tactics to try to provide loans to Greece, even though they were bankrupt, but through a predation that the loans never went to Greece. The loans went back channel to Goldman Sachs and the other firms and Deutsche Bank and everything else that made the loans in the first place. And that's exactly what happened in the United States, because of what I continue to tell you, what the Federal Reserve did in the aftermath of the great 2008 great financial crisis, that I continue to inform you that was all done illegally based on statutes, based on this very concept, where Giannis tells us that Greece was bankrupt, but so was all of Wall Street. They were insolvent. And under no statute anywhere in the history of financial capitalism does it say that if a financial system goes bankrupt and insolvent based on fraud, that you can provide them unlimited liquidity. It's ridiculous. It's insane. It's so buffoonish. It's so stupid. It's beyond comprehension. But that's exactly what they did. And what do they do it for? They did it because of everything we show you in the con at www.thecon.tv, that millions of people need to see. There were tens of millions of people that went through the great financial crisis. If you know somebody and they went through this and they lost a family member, or maybe their lives got destroyed because of a divorce and whatever collateral damage, you've got to inform them that the con exists, and it's for free at www.thecon.tv. But even if you didn't live through that, or you didn't personally experience it, but yet you're kind of like going through life where you have to have a couple of different jobs, and maybe, you know, you get hit by inflation and other things, you need to understand how your government works. Now, beyond that, you know, I want to address just briefly what I interact with a lot, which is just stupid and crazy at the same time, but it's very telling. So, for example, there's a lot of pockets of homeowners. Okay, they call themselves homeowners. They're people that are fighting in courts to maintain their homes because they've been caught in a dragnet of what we call an illegal foreclosure. Because the foreclosing properties, sorry, the foreclosing entities, whether they're banks or their servicers or their law firms or maybe they're asset managers, whatever form they take, typically they represent what are thought of as investors who have, through what we call the rights of assignments, the ability or the legal authority to collect the debt. And if they're not collecting the debt, then they can foreclose. But what happened, because of all the criminal activity that we show you in the con, it became such an unbelievable, ginormous mess by design, because that's how everybody was making money in the food chain, by this insane criminality, that ultimately nothing is accurate. I mean, if the equivalent for our cities and the way we run our elevators and our lights, our stoplights and the airport and flying, I mean, everything would fall out of the sky and destroy, and we'd have absolute chaos if it was designed exactly as our housing market imploded, and what that means in the financial system. It's literally elementary how stupid it is. But meanwhile, there's pockets of these what they call homeowner groups. They're typically led by some sort of attorney who supposedly has on all the answers, and they've been reluctant to actually wrap their heads around all of the information in the con and what we've been doing in these truth bombs and other elements that we've laid out there. For example, what was meant to be season 2 of the con basically manifested in a podcast that I did called The New Untouchables, which is, you just do a search on Google, and it was produced and done in coordination with an outfit called The Real Progressives. Anyway, you can just take a look at The New Untouchables on any Google search, and you'll find it. And that was the second part of what I had intended to be able to bring to the American people. And all of these people, for one reason or another, and I think it's mostly because they think that the con, which shows everything that created everything that led up to the 2008 great financial crisis, doesn't necessarily deal with their details of all of the kind of insanity that happens in the courts that they're desperately trying to hang on by their fingertips to hopefully stay in their homes, because they want to prove that it's an illegal foreclosure because the foreclosing party doesn't have the right to foreclose. Meanwhile, as we've shown the people over and over and over in tens of millions, well, the numbers get crazy because I want to talk about the amount of documentation fraud, but then you think about the amount of courts and then the appellate courts and all of these other, it's just absolutely enormous, the amount of level of fraud and what judges are doing in these cases to basically, it seems to me like they got the message a long time ago from the Department of Justice and the government, whoever oversees all of the judges, that says, look, you're going to bulldoze all of these foreclosures. It's a mess. Nobody can actually, clean this thing up. So what you're going to do is you're going to get rid of everybody, and we're going to start from scratch. Well, there's so many people that have been able to try to last this long and withstand, getting up. But in the end, you find over and over, a lot of these people get, carted off and arrested. And I see it every day. People who have been fighting for years. They're like, okay, I've got this sort of structure. I've got all of these elements. I've got all of this evidence. I've got all of this case law, yada, yada, yada. A lot of people are representing themselves. Sometimes they got an attorney involved in the case that I always reference. A guy by the name of Bruce Jacobs out of South Florida has been fighting these cases, and he has all of the information, but the judges do not allow discovery, which is the whole purpose of a court. And none of these people can get a jury trial. So this whole thing is basically whitewashed behind the scenes, and it's just land theft. It's smash and grab. And it's something that governments have done, in Western imperialist powers for hundreds of years. But it's modern society, and they've used the same tactics, and it's just lying and deception on behalf of, he who has the gold makes the rules. So in our country, that's the financial system that has complete control, and they've gutted our country because they've created tens of millions of lies through this incredible racketeering enterprise that is just a mafiocracy that our government has become. And it's just as simple as it gets. But they can't rise to the moment to understand all of the things that are in the con, because they're resistant and they're stubborn, because many of them know that I can't stand Donald Trump, and they've gone to MAGA. And it's hilarious, because I think for any of you out there, or if you ever happen to come across this, if you happen to be a therapist or a psychologist, in that field, it's an incredible study of what happens when institutions fail. People go absolutely nuts. And it goes back to what I said at the beginning of this, when I was talking to Giannis, and I said, corruption births and fuels fascism. And of course, he was a victim of that, but so was everybody else. But it's amazing, like a Stockholm syndrome. The people that are beat down by their captors or somebody who's destroyed them, a bully, whatever the case is, people tend to come on their side, and they can get fall in line, and that's how we get autocracies or dictatorships or whatever. But that's what these people are doing in the case of Trump. Now, meanwhile, as I continue to reveal to you, and I happened to be on a podcast yesterday with a guy who's a great guy, a dude by the name of Egberto Willies, and he has a pretty big audience, and I think it's going to be on the Pacifica Network as well. But we talked about the corollaries between what the government is demonstrating and proving is illegal in the case of the United States versus Donald Trump, that proves everything that is illegal that we've shown you in the con and that I've talked about in all of our different platforms, and I encourage you all to check out Patrick Level Truth Bombs the Con if you're new to this. And I also highly, highly encourage you, because the blueprint for everything is the con, which we've now made for free at www.thecon.tv, and really everything that's associated with this. But what I continue to tell you, and I have to find millions of you somehow, I have to connect with millions of you, because I said this on Egberto's podcast yesterday, and I said it in my interview with Giannis and Bill yesterday as well. It's kind of like, these corollaries that when you look at the main framing of the case against Donald Trump, it's the United States against Donald Trump, emanating from the January 6th investigation and to all of these different investigations that have led to the 91 indictments and 4 different sort of vectors that, stem from the Southern District of Manhattan with hush money payments to a porn star and all of the illegal activity that's involved with that. Then, of course, you've got the special counsel, DOJ, that's involved with all things top secret clearance documents and everything else. But very important things have emanated from that revelation, where the Department of Justice has done 2 things that are very relevant to what I've just mentioned to you, is that in the case of Donald Trump, the attorneys are lying on behalf of Trump. And so millions of people out there who know that Trump is full of shit and follow mainstream media, particularly MSNBC, if you followed Rachel Maddow all these years, you listen to Alex Wagner, whomever, that, yeah, you can easily accept that, oh, Donald Trump's lawyers are lying to the court. That's a big deal, because they can be obviously charged. They can have their their bar licenses removed, and all sorts of incredible consequences that will destroy their career and throw them in jail potentially, okay? So that's one aspect of it, and that's what the Department of Justice has revealed is happening in the case of Donald Trump as it relates to him hiding top secret clearance documents, that he shouldn't have had at Mar-a-Lago, and his attorneys lied for him. So there's that. Then we're seeing more and more that Judge Eileen Cannon is compromised because she was put into position of, her judiciary from Donald Trump's administration, and she's basically making decisions where she's, manipulating the outcome, which isn't what judges are supposed to do. Judges are supposed to be umpires. They call it balls and strikes based on the law, and that we have to have integrity in the system for the law to run fairly and smoothly. And we all know that that doesn't happen all the time. There could be mistrials. There could be all sorts of problems. You can look at OJ and the madness of that and everything that elicits. But, same with whatever we're going down the pathway with Donald Trump. But in the meantime, Harvard University's Lawrence Tribe, who was a professor to Merrick Garland, who was our attorney general, and then, of course, he's the one who assigned Jack Smith and everything that's involved. It's like, this guy at that stature on Lawrence O'Donnell every night is impugning the integrity of the court, which is huge as well, and of a judge that could be compromised. Now, why is that relevant to everything that I'm revealing to you, that the con reveals, and everything in our work, our collective work, goes done? That it reveals that the government of the United States is demonstrating and validating everything that we've shown you in the con as it relates to Donald Trump. And millions of people are like, yeah, absolutely. For the country to survive and democracy to survive, you got to hold power to account. And Donald Trump is public enemy number 1. And he is. And he's a treasonous goon. And there's so much more going on than these cases have elucidated or will. But they're narrowing all the scope on Donald Trump. They want to cut the head off the snake is the idea, really. And if you kill Trump, you kill MAGA is kind of what they're looking at it, to maybe take it one step at a time. Even though anybody who knows anything about, a military sort of coup d'etat knows that the conspiracy had to be overwhelming as it relates to the insurrection on January 6th. So that's just a little bit of commentary from me, because it's way bigger than all of the things that we're seeing. But ultimately, the other side of the case is that in Fani Willis's RICO conviction, basically the United States is saying that Donald Trump defrauded the United States using illegal documentations to try to steal the election using deceptive acts and practices, whereas attorneys are lying and the judge is compromised. And what does that mean in context? And it was all racketeering to defraud the United States. So what do you think I've done with the con? I proved our financial system run by the Dons, the CEOs of Wall Street, which are, you know, monumentally bigger than Donald Trump, quite frankly, in terms of their impact. They enabled the largest criminal conspiracy and racketeering in the history of the world based on everything we show you in the con, www.thecon.tv, that the entirety of media has hidden from you, that the entirety of the system, like HBO, and I've been a producer for a long time, and I thought we'd land on HBO or Netflix, but they all get their financing to run their operations from the people that we reveal. And the ones that are at the apex of this whole thing is an outfit called BlackRock. And BlackRock, because of everything that we reveal to you, because of what the Federal Reserve did to illegally backstop through tens of trillions of dollars to an insolvent, bankrupt financial entity based on fraud, they picked up the pieces. Everybody, basically swept this stuff under the rug. Nobody stood up. The New York Times didn't stand up. The Washington Post didn't stand up. I'll remind you, both of them were owned by billionaires in that case. Over the course of the last 20 years, every major newspaper in the United States has been bought by either a hedge fund or an asset manager, which, obviously are in the game and their interest are money. And so they don't want you to know this, because really what the system did, and I call it financial terrorism, is they blew up everything that the United States is right in front of our eyes. And so again, Donald Trump is being convicted for defrauding the United States based on racketeering that led to a coup d'etat. Okay, that's what this is. And the media is saying, if we don't arrest Trump, if we don't take him down, if we don't take MAGA down, then democracy is done. And they're right. But democracy was done in 2009. We could argue if it was done back in 1998. We could argue if we ever had a democracy. Of course, all the Republicans always like to say, yeah, we're a constitutional republic, which they're telling you is ruled by the minority, which is really no different than tyranny. Okay, so we had hundreds of years of wars and battles and civil rights movements and everything else to deal with that, and we're still in the midst of that. But what I'm telling you that nobody else has and will, again, because all of their interests are aligned against us, the people, that, and this system worked really well for extremely well for the top 0.001%, because we plowed tens of trillions of dollars into the financial system to backstop it, and they threw money where the money was good, which were billionaires and their apparatuses because of tax policy and other things I don't want to go into. But that's why we saw Elon Musk and CEO of Amazon, why can't I think of his name, and Zuckerberg and everybody else. I don't even. Boy, it's funny that I can't think of the CEO. He's the Jeff Bezos, the richest man on the planet who owns the Washington Post. They all benefited immeasurably. They doubled their wealth during COVID because of the same situation that I'm telling you. But we've been doing this for 13 years, which goes back to what we were talking to Bill and Giannis about yesterday and all the details of how it works and where it led to. But again, to finish this, and I hate to sound like a broken record, but I got to try to bring this to a close. Everybody wants to avert their eyes. Nobody wants to see the forest for the trees. Nobody wants to see the emperor's new clothes. So we've got Humpty Dumpty, this fractured marketplace where people go into their little tribes and everything else. But meanwhile, like I'm telling you, to the millions of people that have got to get your head around this, that Donald Trump has done everything that he's being convicted of, indicted of, and eventually convicted of by doing exactly what Wall Street did, but Wall Street did it monumentally bigger. There were 16 million filed foreclosures in 2012. That you just do the mean numbers on that, 3 people per median household, that's over 48 million people. And then we know that there was tens of millions or more around the world, plus pensions and communities and countries and everything else that got wiped out by this whole thing. And so when everything collapsed, the Federal Reserve gave tens of trillions of dollars to the system that did it. And oh yeah, by the way, as we learned yesterday with Yanis Varoufakis, yeah, all of the global leaders are in on it. They want the dollar to be the global reserve currency because, and I've observed this for the last 20 years, from 9/11 forward, it just seems like all of the oligarchs from around the world are in complete control and they're backstopped by the United States. And that's another story, because of basically a lot of them have laundered money into the United States and are backstopped by our government-sponsored entities that went bankrupt and are now basically in receivership. Yeah, but at the same time, their money was safe. Everybody's money is safe. The billions and trillions of dollars from around the world, from the oil producers or the manufacturers and everything else, and how the whole globalism paradigm runs. I mean, it runs through us. Now, there's this discussion of the BRICS countries breakaway and whether or not they'll be able to do that. And if they do, it's probably going to be, I don't know, quite a while. But meanwhile, from what I'm hearing, the markets are basically once again, doing a dance on thin ice. And we've known for a long time commercial real estate is about to pop or blow in a big way. All you got to do is look around every single city, guys. Where I live, we've got monumentally beautiful new skyscrapers that are mostly apartment buildings, like 5-star type apartment buildings, next door to like homeless people all over the place. The ebbs and flows of supply and demand, and shall we say, and this is why we're not a capitalist country, because there's no risk reward. This is all inside pool guaranteed. And the investors in all of these buildings, they've already sold their securities back to the Federal Reserve with what we call the mortgage back through quantitative easing, that they then sell to the world in bonds. And to me, it's never looked sustainable. It hasn't been sustainable since 2009. And we've just constantly floated the countries and the system where there's no equilibrium, there's no balance. And most people out there that are working 2 jobs, hanging on by their fingertips, paying a lot of money in rent and food and gas and everything else. And, they don't have a lot of savings. So for there to be a credit crisis, just like there was in 2008, one domino has to go the wrong way. And everything is like, run for your fucking life, man. Godzilla's coming down and you better run, because that's what we did in 2008. And, that's what it looks like now. Yesterday, Warren Buffett said, the lights are blinking red again. We saw just this past week, Michael Burry, the famous hedge funder that did The Big Short, that the film The Big Short is based on. He bet 1.7 billion, I think it was 1.6 billion against this market, based on, I think, puts. He's shorting puts, I guess. But anyway, there's even more to it. But look, I hope I didn't miss anything. I'm holding the $29 trillion truth. And when you've got the truth, you're bulletproof. I just need millions upon millions of you to listen to what I'm saying, to see the work, to understand that what I'm telling you is the emperor's new clothes. You've got to see the forest for the trees. You've got to understand this is the biggest predicate, right? And this is what I'm not so sure about with all of you out there. You got to believe and willing to fight for liberty and justice for all. You've got to be a part of a generation that previous Americans had waged war, sacrificed their lives from the American Revolution. And I know a lot of people could poo-poo. They're like, oh yeah, it was white landowners and 3/5 citizenry and everything else. There was a lot of abolitionists at that time period that didn't want to do that, but they compromised. Okay, so they made a mistake. We ended up becoming this agrarian superpower, cotton and everything else. Then what do we have? We had, the South secede. The North became industrial. Lincoln wanted to bring it back together. We have the civil rights. We ended up with the 13th Amendment. Okay, we end slavery, but then we end up with Jim Crow. So it's been this constant battle, and I could go through all of the other history, but just think of the sacrifices from the Civil War, from the American Revolution to the Civil War to, basically World War I and World War II. World War II monumentally bigger for us, at least, and we defeated fascism. We always have to fight these forces of evil, including ourselves. And that's what Abraham Lincoln said, we have to enable the better angels of our nature. I mean, and then he also said the greatest line, I think, in all of political history for me, which is a nation of by and for the people shall not perish for this earth. I'm fighting for democracy, a real democracy, not a perverted, inverted totalitarianism that's a techno-feudalism, that's essentially a financial hijacking and a coup d'etat that happened in 2008, which brings us to, the way I set the whole thing up, that we're a corporate fascist state undergirded by a criminal syndicate that uses socialism to fuel the mafiocracy or guarantee with the full faith and credit of the United States a mob that has basically stolen everything that are above the law that are now fueling fascism, which is unacceptable. We've got to rise as a movement. We've got to rise as a populist tidal wave crusade to purge corruption. I have all the answers. I have all the access to the people who have all the answers. I've got all of the evidence. This is beyond your wildest comprehension. Why am I standing alone? Why am I standing alone? Why aren't I joined by tens of millions of you? So what we're trying to do is do a political movement. All political movements have to have fundraising, because you can't run for a Republican or a Democrat unless you raise, I don't know, north of like, I don't know, $500,000 or something like that just to get on the presidential ticket. Money is your ticket to getting a voice in this system, particularly after Citizens United. So what I'm doing is a kind of a little bit of a trick. It's like, look, man, I'm asking you to invest $13 in this movement, but if I can get the numbers, then hopefully I can generate a podcast that leads to a new, sort of documentary sort of world that enables all of the stuff. I've got so many access to so many answers that make your head spin, and all of these things from like Sam Bankman-Fried and the law firms of like Sullivan and Cromwell, which spawned the CIA and what their involvement is, and 9/11 and everything else. I deal with the families of 9/11. If you get involved and we are able to make this happen, we'll bring these stories to light week in and week out, highly polished, highly produced, and then ultimately we'll be able to break these truths beyond this Orwellian bubble of Rachel Maddow and Tucker Carlson and Anderson Cooper and Sean Hannity and the likes of Russell Brand and Joe Rogan and everybody else. None of these people have the answers. They're not going to tell you this. Neither are the presidential candidates. I was hoping Bobby Kennedy would go there. He's not going to go there. I was hoping Cornel West could go there. Cornel West doesn't know this stuff. They're both intelligent. Cornel West is very intelligent. I've still, jury's still out on Bobby Kennedy, but Biden, when I see Biden and Maui yesterday, Biden looks to me like he's 81. Like he's too old, just like Mitch McConnell, too old, just like, Dianne Feinstein, too old. We've got to build another party. We've got to build a third party, a party of justice that purges corruption with the facts, that doesn't talk in hyperbole, doesn't talk in circles, doesn't try to hide the truth to serve power at the expense of the many. What I'm trying to do is create a political movement of the many versus the money. And ultimately, the way you do that is if you invest $13, just like millions of you did with Bernie Sanders, after Bernie Sanders rode the Occupy Wall Street wave that became, his, revolution, pseudo-revolution for America, but people gave him money in droves and he raised like $180 million to do what? To capitulate to the Democratic Party, who basically is corrupt beyond comprehension. That's how big this is. And Bernie never solved the riddle. He did a lot of wonderful things, but he never solved the riddle. Same with Elizabeth Warren. Guys, this is politics is warfare, but it's warfare for the rich, okay? And what we're seeing on display between Trump and the system is just simply the new Confederacy and right-wing billionaires that basically want a white supremacist society that never bought into liberty and justice for all and the Bill of Rights and everything else. It has to be the rest of us. And by the way, President Obama isn't our answer. Neither was Clinton. Look, this is all a panoply of this. Look, man, dancing with the devil. The greatest trick the devil ever played was to convince the world he didn't exist. So if you invest $13 with this movement, then I can put to work all of this stuff. But eventually, guys, listen, man, I've got hundreds of hours of footage and tens of thousands of pieces of documentation fraud and evidence up the wazoo in every which way that I have got to create a Lollapalooza-like barnstorming tour to go around this nation, all around the nation, and then wind up in climax, on this journey in Washington, D.C., which would be the end of a 13-year odyssey for me, which I started doing the exact same thing. I launched my first documentary film, surfing the Occupy Wall Street wave across the United States, and I wound up in Oz between D.C. and New York when the NYPD came down heavily on Occupy Wall Street. And that led me on this journey where I ended up learning about Bill Black, and I found out everything from all of the whistleblowers, the largest criminal conspiracy and cover-up in history. And who am I? Am I Russell Brand? Am I this? Am I that? No, I'm Patrick Lovell, the guy who went the distance on behalf of America for liberty and justice for all, for truth and justice, because it matters. It matters to me above all else, because corruption births and fuels fascism, and we have got to crush both. And if we do, if your issue is the climate, if your issue is paradigm change with energy, this is how we get there. If your issue is systemic racism in prisons and that sort of thing, this is how we break the back of that as well. Look, it's good versus evil. We can do this. And what am I doing? Am I running for presidency? No, I'm running a campaign to elevate the truth over the madness of lies, to hopefully, build a political party to put in the right president. And is it me? Yeah, maybe. I don't know. All I know is I'm the producer. I am a producer. That's what I've done my last 25 years of existence. I'm really good at it, and that's why I'm doing this. And I know you can afford $13, because $13 is what you spend at a fast food restaurant now. $13 is what you spend at Starbucks. $13 is your ticket to redemption and the resurrection and exodus from corruption to the resurrection of the American dream. Failure is not an option. Rise, roar, revolt, onwards and upwards. And by the way, if you can't afford 13 bucks, just share. Just give us some energy. Help us get the message out there. Help us break through this largesse of people turning off their brains to what's right in front of them. We cannot be this stupid. We were once the greatest country in the history of the world. Now we're in absolute disarray because of the decay, because of the madness of pollution and destruction of corruption. I don't know what else to say, people. I've got the answers. Join me. Onwards and upwards.